Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a guide for Marie Antoinette Alter. She's a 5-star story-locked Avenger released in id, the second Ordeal Call chapter. But you may remember her as the villain of the Fate Requiem crossover, Board Game Apocalypse. You remember that, right? The event where you read the world's worst game of Werewolf and then skipped every other chapter? Good times. Do not pass go, spend 3 more gold apples. But Marie has a chance to make a second impression, so let's see if she's got what it takes to carve a place amongst the notables for this year. One of Marie's most notable skills is Guillotine of Ridicule. This is a curse that lasts for 3 turns and ticks for 5,000 damage. It also gives Marie arts effectiveness and a power mod against cursed enemies. In other words, this acts as a near universal anti-buff since it meets its own activation requirements. Pretty nice, though landing debuffs against major enemies can be a bit of a crapshoot between magic resistance and the uncommon immunity. But even if you whiff with Guillotine of Ridicule, Marie has her noble phantasm, Vivictus. Now, there's like a billion different ways to pronounce this. You know, Vivictus, Vivictus, Vivictis, something like that. I'm just gonna go with Vivictus. You know, save myself some trouble, but if you've heard it a different way, someone at some point in time probably said it like that. This is an AoE arts attack that preemptively applies a curse and a curse damage amplifier for 5 turns. This gives you another chance to turn on your anti-curse buff. As additional effects, Vivictus applies charge reduction and has a low insta-kill chance. It overcharges a single turn of preemptive NP damage. The insta-kill is pretty much useless. Its probability starts at a pathetic 60%, and Marie has nothing to boost it anyway, so don't run her for this purpose. The charge reduction can potentially work nicely if you spam this out. And yeah, if you were so inclined, you can make a really slow, grinding team with Marie Alter. She has a lot of tools that can be applied to this end. Bloodstained Necklace is a 30% self-battery that gives 20% charge per turn and 10% charge when Marie is struck. That last one can proc up to 5 times and pairs nicely with the Avenger passive. As an art servant, Marie can of course lean on the power of Castoria and company to loop her enemies into oblivion. For farming, spamming Vivictus with Guillotine of Ridicule up will deal with generic cannon fodder. For higher-end applications though, you'll likely struggle to clear nodes with her. With everything active, Marie Alter's noble phantasm does less than summer commas. Of course, Kama can only use her full power for 1 turn. But even taking that into account, Kama often struggles to hold her own in 90+ and 90++ encounters. And both of these servants have such selfish kits that they offer next to nothing for multi-core teams. You either run them as the centerpiece, or not at all. So while Marie Alter has easy access to her anti-curse damage, it's less of an advantage and more of a necessity in the rat race of arts generalists. Where you may have better luck with her is in defensive boss setups. One of Marie's big weaknesses is how much she relies on her anti-curse buff to deal damage, but it has a 3-turn uptime with a 6-turn cooldown. So if you want to play the long game with her, you're gonna want some cooldown reduction. That's where Tamamo no Mae comes in. One advantage of Marie having a battery with such generous side benefits is that you don't need 2 separate charge supports to get off the ground. This lets you slot in the arthritic grandma of art supports. Because Tamamo has cooldown reduction tied to her noble phantasm and not a skill, she can spam it as often as you can build her meter. For some protection, Marie Alter contributes My Love is Eternal. This skill gives her 3 hits of invulnerability, her party a 3k heal, and everyone except herself guts. In a defensive team, this means that unless you get your buffs purged, your supports have that extra backstop. Now for pure attrition, the Immortal team can outgrind anything with Marie Alter in it. But if you need to rely on debuffs, or you can operate without absolute protection, you can probably get things done a bit faster with her. With a 5k curse and more from her noble phantasm, you might think to pair Marie Alter with Kateku Mikocare, who can extend debuff durations. But extending debuffs is really more of a sideshow to Bovin's main shtick, which is chaining NP regeneration effects with another copy of herself, and then extending them until you can NP every turn. But that particular application calls for access to cooldown reduction, and while Marie has many things that fall into Bovin's Venn diagram, CDR isn't one of them. So a frontline of double Kateku with Marie Alter is going to run out of steam pretty quickly. Tragic. If you plan to take a serious crack at using Marie Alter, here's some equipment I'd recommend. Black Grail is the end goal as you'd expect, but while you're building up to it, consider Ocean Flyer if you have it, and Holy Night Supper if you don't. And if you were around for the Wangina World Tour event, try How to Travel the Stars, which provides additional anti-curse damage and starting charge. For command codes, you mostly pick those tactically in response to whatever gimmick you're up against. But if you need filler options, run curse applying codes so you can fish for ways to activate her anti-curse damage against particularly stubborn targets. Get some extra mileage out of her curse amp too. Overall, I'm pretty lukewarm on Marie Alter. She's mechanically a competent NP spammer and curse stacker, but this doesn't really translate into huge hits. And this is despite her colossal attack stat. A bit of the old Shu-10 syndrome on that one. It really feels like her damage gimmicks are there to tread water, instead of actually giving her an edge or even a truly unique playstyle. Compare her to Taisui, who essentially has his own minigame of controlling the order in which enemies die, so he can spread his curse effectively in running fights. Marie is quite dull by comparison. Defensively, she can be run alongside the usual art suspects to tank and spank, but a lot of servants can fill that role. Turns out when you run Castoria with Lady Avalon or Tamamo, you can get away with a lot of bullshit. But without a true advantage to push against her competition, Marie Alter flounders in the Generalist arms race. And indeed, there's an infinitely superior AoE Arts Generalist coming later this year. So I'd say keep your quartz for better prospects. That was some grisly business, and it's about to get worse. History time. As usual, I'm not a historian, I just like a good story. So with that in mind, let's proceed. Marie Antoinette had spent the last few years with a metaphorical noose tightening around her neck. That noose became much tighter as of late. Once she was Queen of France. Now she's called the Widow Capet, a commoner alone and waiting for the next bit of misfortune to come her way. And indeed, when the door to her cell finally opened, it was just to ferry her from the hell of isolation to a hell of her new peers. In this court, the stands were full of hostile onlookers, and the jury was packed with men either loyal to the revolution as a whole or to Robespierre personally. Then came the prosecutor and all the accusations. These all happened over the course of several days, so I'll give you the short version. You, Marie Capet, contributed to the financial ruin of France. You turned your husband against the people. You even trampled upon the tricolor cockade, the very symbol of the revolution. It's a package of vague assertions and unsubstantiated rumors, nothing you can back up with evidence. And let's not forget, you attempted to flee France, so you could, what, rally foreign armies in opposition to this nation? Ah yes, that would be the flight of a wren. The royal family did indeed make a run for it at one point, story for another day. But as you may have surmised, it didn't work, and afterwards they lost what little freedom of movement they had before. But even trapped in the palace, they still had levers to pull. The foreign army that they were accused of colluding with? While it would take the form of a coalition, the main force in question were the Austrians. But here's the funny part. The Holy Roman Emperor, Marie's own brother, was actually content to leave her out to dry. Not only was his own eastern frontier unstable, but he could use France's weakness to open up his other political options. So if Marie were to be a weak queen in a weak country, that was good enough for him. But a lot of the old nobility had fled France, and quite a few of them had set up shop inside Habsburg territory, and their presence was a source of tremendous irritation for the leaders of the revolution. So they wanted to threaten the Austrians and German princes into kicking these emigres out. When they broached the subject with Louis XVI, still technically out of state, and wanted him to send an ultimatum, he agreed. Not out of some newfound love for the revolution, but because he wanted to do a little accelerationism. If the Austrians wanted to leave him in the lurch, he could force them to intervene by starting a war against them. Then the commoner rabble armies of the revolution would be swept aside by professional soldiers, who would then liberate his family from their imprisonment. But this bit of warmongering would have catastrophic consequences for the royal family. As the gears of conflict spun up, the leader of the anti-French coalition made an announcement. They're not going to pillage or otherwise rampage around. They just want to restore order and ensure the safety of the royals, and so on and so forth. But then he drops this banger. If the chateau of the Tuileries entered by force or attacked, if the least violence be offered to their majesties, and if their safety and their liberty are not immediately assured, we will inflict an ever-memorable vengeance by delivering over the city of Paris to military execution and complete destruction, and the rebels guilty of these said outrages to the punishment that they merit. In other words, if you fuck with the royal family, we'll put all of you to the sword. The goal of this tough talk was to cow Paris into submission, but it did quite the reverse. When the mobs learned about this threat, they whipped themselves into a murderous frenzy. Because the royal family must have been colluding with the Austrians to betray the revolution in exchange for saving their own skins. So they surged toward the palace with killing intent. And hearing of this, the royals fled to the Legislative Assembly building. While it was sufficient to keep their heads for the moment, this is the point where their situation deteriorated rapidly. After that insurrection, they were completely at the mercy of the revolutionary winds. Marie, Louis, and their son were successively imprisoned and then stripped of their royalty. And as the revolution took increasingly radical turns, calls for their blood intensified. The prosecutor continues, "You colluded with enemies of France, goading them to invade and then revealing the secrets of our armies through clandestine messages." Now this Marie had done. She'd written a stream of correspondence to her relatives in Austria, demanding action against these lunatic commoners. and if the court had any evidence of this, she wouldn't have the slightest hope of mounting a defense. But no such revelation came, so it appears they haven't found her letters, at least not yet. Then came a curveball. Jacques Hébert, an infamous rabble-rouser and bloodthirsty revolutionary, walked in and dropped a bombshell. While in the care of a patriot family, the son of Marie Capet, Louis Charles, was caught abusing himself. When they asked him how he learned such a thing, the boy said he learned it from his mother. And these inappropriate acts were not a one-time thing. Hébert then whipped out a piece of paper. A statement, signed by the boy himself. When the court persisted in this line of thought, demanding a response, Marie piped up furiously. It would be against nature for a mother to reply to such an accusation. This drew murmurs from the housewives present. While they often bayed for blood, Hébert's claim was well beyond the pale, and without hard evidence, it was just tasteless character assassination, the kind that wouldn't fly even in the French Revolution. The signed statement? As Marie quickly pointed out, a small child can be compelled to say or sign just about anything. She had won the moment, but it was a droplet of victory amidst a sea of scorn. Before the jury deliberated its verdict, the prosecutor reminded them, whether Marie Capet is guilty of the specific crimes presented in this trial, the course of the revolution itself has deemed her as a traitor to the people and to the nation. For the sake of the French, she must die. As if to emphasize his point, he had Marie's attorneys arrested after they gave their final remarks on charges that were drafted before the trial had even started. But before I go further, let's deal with the fate of Louis Charles, retroactively Louis XVII, though he never reigned as such. The boy was forcibly taken from Marie Antoinette and then given to the care of that patriot couple from earlier. Under their supervision, he'd alternatively be beaten or forced to drink himself into a stupor. And indeed, it was in the latter state that Jacques Hébert was able to extract his signature, agreeing to Hébert's lurid version of events. Oh, and if the boy had sought to escape his misery through prayer, he'd be beaten some more. The revolution had no need of children prattling their little prayers. Certainly not to the old god, though Robespierre's experiments in revolutionary theology are, perhaps, a subject best saved for another time. Once they were bored of him, his caretakers left him to the government, and during the chaos of the Reign of Terror, he would be left to rot in a small, lightless cell. Though his jailers would keep him fed, that was it. He wasn't allowed to leave his cell, which was a bit of a problem because there was no toilet. So the boy had to live in his own filth for the better part of a year. Though the conditions of his imprisonment would improve after Robespierre's downfall, his health would not, and he succumbed to disease. Given what he had endured up to that point, I'm not surprised. The one mercy afforded to the child was that he never found out what happened to his mother. Speaking of which, guilty. Marie Antoinette was found guilty and sentenced to death. She was loaded into an open cart, but despite the circumstances, she kept as dignified a posture as the situation would allow. Then it came into view. The executioner tasked with the job was a man named Sanson, not Charles-Henri, but rather his son. But he wasn't going to lop off anyone's head with a sword. No, the real star of the show would be the guillotine, a symbol that, whether born high or low, criminals would meet the same end. Of course, the definition of criminal became pretty loose as the revolution went on. With her head placed under the blade, the last thing Marie Antoinette heard was the sound of wood grinding on wood, followed by a sudden thud. So ends the story. I want to thank you all for watching. The week this video comes out, I'll be doing some streams. Resident Evil 5 co-op on Friday. On Saturday and Sunday, I'll be playing through Ordeal Call 2 live. So if you want to get in on that, stop by twitch.tv/Finotaisen. I start at 3 p.m. Pacific time. I'll see you there.